What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that is committed to raising standards. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the president of the European Commission, so as long as it's not after one of his famous long lunches. Or maybe after would be preferable. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from the latest IMF reports warning of a European economic downturn to whether or not Brexit has reached the point of no return. And of course, the innovation and success in the country that makes it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course, current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Hayley Johnson-Tonks, the Managing Director of GK Training Services. GKTS was founded in November 2005. The company was started in order to deliver high-quality training throughout Greater Manchester, but predominantly in the borough of Wigan. Hayley joined GKTS in 2008 with a view to retaining and improving the culture of self-improvement and equal opportunities that attracted her to the role in the first place. The company now helps develop the skills of over 100 young people every year and has been able to overcome the challenges encountered as a result of the government's recent funding cuts. We discuss this and more with Hayley now. Hayley, welcome.
Hiya.
Thanks very much for joining us today. Now, it's been some months since GK Training's been in the review. I think the listeners would love to know what the firm and yourselves have been up to since.
Obviously, since participating in the Parliamentary Review, we've had a lot of feedback from our external partners and external organisations, obviously, congratulating us on taking part. We've obviously started a new academic year since the review took place, and we've had an increased contract from the Education and Skills Funding Agency. We've further developed our SEND provision, and we've opened a new loft classroom, which we invested, obviously, monies into the buildings to ensure we could facilitate people with high needs so they've got a quieter space to work in. So that's what we've done since probably March of last year.
Fantastic. So keeping nice and busy and then.
Yeah.
Now, you've been with the company now for over 10 years, I think I'm right in saying.
I have, yeah.
Excellent. And it's safe to say that in that time, GK Training's been on a heck of a journey. How would you say the company has changed and grown in that time?
I think, obviously, from my point of view, because I started back in 2008, and I'd never been involved in any form of training before. I'd completed my apprenticeships whilst I was, in a retail environment. So I did my intermediate and advanced. So I had an interest in obviously delivering and helping people. So when I first joined, we were very small and we worked in a little office over in Wigan. And then we quickly grew because we knew the demand for obviously people within the borough was quite high in relation to people that were out of training, out of education, that didn't do very well at school. So initially we started off with it was like an E2E entry to employment program. And then we were delivering like straight MVQs to people that were in working environments, for 6 months. And from there, obviously with things changing, we went on to a foundation program where you had to deliver qualifications to 16 to 18-year-olds, and then functional skills come in as part of apprenticeships, and the MVQs were kind of, standalone MVQs were kind of phased out. And then from that point, we then went on to study programs, which is where we're currently sat now. I'd say how it's changed, it's been more... With the study programme, it is heavily qualification-based, so it's important that young people now get their English, the maths and their ICT, along with their employability skills and then work experience, because that's the core of what we do, and it's changed heavily because when we first started, there wasn't as much focus on the academic side in relation to the maths and English, whereas now that's how it's moved from that point of view. Apprenticeship-wise, we no longer deliver apprenticeships because we are quite a small training provider, so we don't have the capacity and obviously the staffing levels to deliver such large contracts. So we decided that we were going to move away from that and just focus solely on young people that are not in employment, education or training, and try and help them and assist them into moving into a more positive direction, even if they had a bad start in life. Yes, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. And I think that really is what's so great about Getty GK is that it does work with young people from so many different types of often disadvantaged backgrounds. And it's a challenge, I think, that's probably not talked about enough in the political arena. Obviously, in your time there, you've overcome huge obstacles with the firm, especially being, as you've mentioned, a smaller provider. It is naturally more difficult to perhaps recruit young people in the first place. How important is it, would you say, is having good and cordial links with the local council and schools in the area and to build up that network?
It's huge, because if you didn't have that, and we do get obviously a lot of our referrals from our local authority and from schools that we form links with, and if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have obviously the numbers that we'd need to come through the door to meet obviously a contract or to help and serve the young people of the surrounding area. A lot of our people and referrals as well come from word of mouth. So obviously if somebody's been here, maybe a brother or a sister would then come here a couple of years after, and then they'll say, oh, my brother come here, or my sister come here, or my cousin come here. So we've built up that link. But there is a lot of people that still walk past us, and they might pop in on the off chance that we can help them, and then they realise what we are and that we're a training provider, and they're like, we didn't realise you were here, and we've been here for 10 years. So because we're not huge, we're not a big organisation, sometimes we kind of get lost.
Absolutely. But although that's not to say small maybe, but still 100 individuals per year you work with, if that's right.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's between 80 and 100, depending on obviously our contract size and referral rates and the referrals that we get. It was bigger when we had the apprenticeships, because obviously we'd have two assessors with caseloads of 35 each, so you were looking at like 70, so then it's like 170 learners. But obviously we're changing it and adapting it to meet the needs of the business, to maintain obviously the financial side of things, to ensure that we can run effectively and still continue to invest and grow from a technology point of view and from a buildings point of view, so they're comfortable when they come in here as well.
And since you brought it up, I think it's probably worth us talking about the reduction in government funding over the years. It's never an easy thing. Now, how have you and the firm coped with this internally, and how have you adapted to still be a success whilst having this rather stringent cuts imposed on you?
I think obviously just ensuring that our staffing levels are at a rate where we need to ensure that we're not overstaffed to a point where, for want of a better term, throwing money away just because we need staffing. We've got specialised staffing that are specific to each individual group. So we'll have maybe 10 to 12 learners in each group, so they're really small. So I've kept the staffing levels controlled. And we've just adapted things, so like we have budgets in place, so we have like meetings, so quality forum and operational meetings each month, and all the staff sit down, and we run a tight ship. So if we've overspent in one area, then all the staff will know that we've overspent in an area, and then if we've underspent and we've got a little bit of extra money, then the staff will know that. So it's just obviously managing costs. Obviously the cuts. The year I took over the business in 2016, the cuts had already come in. Well, they already most definitely started to come into place. So I think it was just kind of expected it. So it just kind of happened. So obviously watching the business plan, monitoring our profiles, ensuring we meet the contracts, managing our budgets effectively, ensuring the staffing levels are at the right level and not. If you understand where I'm coming from, it's like I don't. You need teachers and
it makes perfect sense, because I think at the underlying level for all small business, and every small business person listening to this will know exactly what you're talking about. To get everything at the top right, you have to make sure everything at the lowest level is correct, and that includes yes, when it comes to budgets, you can't take your eye off the ball, can you?
Even buying milk and tea and coffee and sugar.
Precisely. But you can't have an office without that.
Exactly.
Now, looking at the section more broadly, though, Hayley, especially when it comes to qualifications for young people, what would you say the major challenges are facing the sector at the moment?
Is that obviously from my personal perspective?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think they don't understand, like, the young people of today, and I'm not saying, like, every generation, there's obviously been different challenges. I think what's increasingly hard and what is becoming harder is the fact that they don't understand the importance of having a good education. And when they come in here, they think, because obviously some of them get bursary payments and things like that, they specifically come in here because they think, oh, well, I want money. They don't understand that you get money if you qualify for money, and that is their take on their education, until they actually realise that it's really important that they have life skills and they have education and they have the maths and English, and they can engage in some kind of work experience. When you actually get through to that young person and make them understand that, then obviously things change. But I think that's becoming increasingly more difficult as time goes on, because the way that they are and the way that they approach things, not all of them, I'm just talking generally, they become more, it's like the respect's changed, it's like the goalposts have changed almost. So perhaps, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Hayley, but if a 16-year-old, obviously, you're working with, you may be the first person they've had in their life that's installed with them the value of education, qualification, and to an extent hard work. Yeah, because they think they can come in here. Like, so if some of them will turn up at, we start from 9 till 4 and it's Monday to Thursday. So if they're entitled to bursary, they get bursary payments. We give them, encouragement and incentives to ensure they have really good attendance and punctuality, to complete the working session. And sometimes they'll turn up at 9:30, walk in, they don't apologise, and then it's us getting through to them to say, look, if you turn up for work at 9:30 when you're due to be at work by 9 o'clock, you need to understand that your pay will be dropped, or you will get in trouble. It's just trying to get. So I don't know whether this is coming from schools, whether it's from a home background. It's quite concerning, and the lack of respect in relation to the peers and the people that are actually there to help them. They don't have any. And
do you think that breakdown in respect and recognition for what other people are doing in trying to help them, do you think that is due to is it often family breakdown? Is it because the schools have given up? Where could you? Is it possible? Could you name the point at which you think the rot begins?
I mean, it's really hard because I think, obviously sometimes coming from a disadvantaged family or coming from like a school where they've not really got the attention or, the nurture that they need, that could be another problem. But I don't think there is an actual, you can't actually pinpoint it because if you're looking from your own personal circumstances, dependent on what you've been through in your life, because everybody goes through something within their lives, whether that be when they're 5, whether it's 10, 15. Some of us are lucky enough to be in the 20s, but something happens. And I think the frustrating thing is they think when they come in here, because we run this organisation, we don't understand them because they've been mistreated or they might have been ignored at school. So I think it's that anger that they have when they first come to us initially, because they think we are their enemy, and we've got to kind of change their thinking. Yeah, there's a lack of trust. They've got barriers up, and I mean, for example, some young people that come to us, they've got autism or ADHD, and they've been put in rooms, so they've been put in inclusion within a school environment and been punished for the behaviour because it's not been dealt with effectively. And I think that maybe one of the root causes of the problem, but I don't know whether you can blame the schools or you can blame the parents because there is lack of funds in relation to that specific area, so they've not got the staff or the resources to deal with it. And that, I think that's probably one. I'm no genius in relation to it, but that's one of my theories.
And I've not heard a better one. This may be a bit of an unfair question, Hayley, but I do ask everyone. Let's pretend you've just, in this upcoming general election, you've just been elected the MP for Lee, and you're put in the cabinet, you're the Minister for Education and Young People, and you have a magic wand. What is it you would do on the first day, and what is it government could do that could really help the young people you work with and your business?
I think it's focusing on people that have got higher needs and do come from disadvantaged backgrounds, to ensure that there's enough resource to deal with the problem. I think that's the only way I can describe it, because if you think from my point of view, because I'm in Lee, I'm based in Lee, and it is, it's a disadvantaged area. So I work in Lee every day and I see these young people, I see them on the street. So that's something that I would target straight away. There's no youth clubs, there's not enough money for youth. Do you understand? It's like, I don't know whether there's any government funding around for youth clubs, but there's nowhere for them to go. So if they come here, but when they go out of here, there's nowhere, so they're on the streets. And I think it's that I would look at.
And it's
a very hard question, that, actually.
Oh no, I know it is. It is because you can think of 1,000 things, no doubt. And
yeah.
It's something that the one you bring up often is the one that's closest to the heart.
I think. Sorry to interrupt you, Jonathan. There is something that, like, we had a bit of a talk with them the other week, and one of the groups that we've got in, and they were talking about, government and who our Prime Minister is, and they haven't got a clue. They don't even know, and they don't understand why we have, a parliament, why it's so, it's so amazing that we've got a monarchy. There's nothing, they don't, I don't know whether that's from home or whether it's not instilled in school, or I don't know.
And perhaps a combination of both.
Yeah.
And so, we live in a time now. Listeners should know. Obviously, we're recording this during the latest general election, and there is a feeling, I think, in the country that people are engaged more than usual in politics. And I was going to ask, but I think you've certainly answered it. That's not clearly filtered down to a lot of the people you work with. That's right, Hayley.
I think, obviously, I know what's going on. I don't have an opinion at this point in time. All I could say is that I think once Brexit's done, then I think that the world will be a better place.
Yes.
It's scary and it's it's uncertain times, and I think I could certainly speak for everybody in here that everyone's really apprehensive about what's going to happen, and so it's like everyone's uneasy about it. But the young people, they don't pay any attention. They didn't even know who Boris Johnson was.
Well, I think the great hope, I think, is that if, and whatever the result of this election, if Brexit is sorted out one way or the other, it means that politicians can start talking about the things that really matter, like education, like qualifications and services for young people. Because at the minute, I think the feeling is that Brexit has sucked all of the oxygen out of the room, and no one's talking about anything else. But perhaps I'm conscious of the time, and we'll have to. You have a busy day, and we'll have to start to wrap up. But perhaps looking forward a bit more optimistically, what is it you would say to? Given you work with young people every day of your life, what is it you would say to the politicians and policymakers at local and national level about the young people of today and what their future, what it is they're looking forward to?
I think it's just really important that moving forward, and I'm again no expert on this, but to ensure that we invest the time in our young people so they understand, what our country's about. We embed within GK Training Services, the British values. Within the 5 strands, we talk about them. They're embedded into our programs, and we try and promote them. And what it is to be British and to behave and have good attitudes and behaviours towards work, and to becoming, a well-rounded individual and citizen and contributing to the country. I think that is what I think is important, how we get there and how we get them to understand that's another matter altogether. That's what I would say.
And it's a point, I think, that it's a superb point, Hayley, because whether it's, our freedom, democracy, pride in the monarchy, it's something that does bind us as a people. And it doesn't matter where in the country you're from or what your background is. If you respect those values together, you're the same people. And it means that when those young people do go on, become adults and have hopefully families of their own, they'll all have something in common. Hayley, I know obviously you've already said your new term has started, having gone September. I wish you all the best for the year ahead, and hopefully we'll be able to chat perhaps in maybe in a half term before long.
Yes, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.
Bye.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Hayley, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector. I think we can all applaud the great work Hayley and her team at GK Training are doing, especially in giving young people from disadvantaged backgrounds the opportunity to improve themselves. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary's Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as a keen vexillologist. That's flags for you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything. But there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Control Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing would be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40-odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshirean, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I was
used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
You're echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said. What some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Plunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through. Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder of visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives had never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the from the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continuing as the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, but may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet. This is something like that goes in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and warband. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
Very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that. Or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death counts. And we need to kind of understand the Anstalt-Gruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy. The former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you're quite unscathed from it.
I can't. He was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know there's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Red Lion to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by guests in each podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guests on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.